Evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Matt Sayer, and I reside in Springfield, but most of my working hours are spent in downtown Eugene, Emily Semple's ward. I'm here tonight to express the hopes of Eugene's tech community on the topic of ride sharing. We appreciate Council picking this topic back up, and we are thankful that local government is looking out for the safety of our citizens. We believe that careful attention should be paid to the rules guiding our transportation system. Like many citizens, however, it has been a mystery for the tech community as to why Eugene doesn't have ride-sharing services. So we researched it. What we found are 3 key differences from Eugene's current transportation rules and those of Salem and other cities around Oregon where ride-sharing companies now operate. The key difference: Eugene currently requires blanket commercial liability insurance of at least $2 million. Compatible ride-sharing rules use a 3-period time model where there are different insurance coverages for the period of time when the mobile app is turned on, when a car is en route to pick up a passenger, and when a passenger is in the car. 2, Eugene currently does background checks via a local law enforcement database. Compatible ride-sharing rules enable the use of a national background check system that utilizes local, state, and national criminal history databases. 3, currently Eugene requires that they inspect a vehicle before it can go into service. Compatible ride-sharing rules enable the use of third-party mechanics certified by the National Institute for Automotive Service Excellence to complete the inspections. In summary, none of those differences are either wrong or right, but they are just different. Different enough, however, to prevent ride-sharing companies from operating here. Templates of compatible ordinances can be found as close as Corvallis, ordinances which would enable a level playing field for Eugene where both ride-sharing companies and taxis can operate. I'm going to close on the topic of safety. You don't need statistics to tell you that when you make it easier for people to make smart choices, chances are they will. With New Year's Eve coming up, the City Council has an opportunity to make it easy for people to make the smart choice to not drink and drive so that everyone gets home safe this year. The tech community is thankful that local government is looking out for Eugene's safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Conlon, followed by Michelle Emmons.
Hi, my name is Jim Conlon. I'd like to thank the mayor and the council and everyone for being here. I work with Oregon Taxi, the largest taxi company here in Eugene, Oregon. I've been with them 10 years. I drove for 5. I dispatch now. In all of the talk, I see this. One of the things that was said was Uber, etc., is a revenue source or an easy way of doing something and so on. I would just like to say that as taxi drivers, we're professionals. There's about 500 of us in this town. We transport the needy. We transport wheelchairs. We do door-to-door service. We do service for medical transport, for Whitebird, for full access brokerage, Mentor, many accounts with U of O and so on. A lot of this we do at discounted rates without tips. A lot of their runs are the cream right off the top, and it would exclude us from being able to do what we do, which is provide a service to the community and the people here in Eugene Springfield. We do things unique here in Eugene Springfield for a reason, because we care, and we have our regulations that were enumerated very well. And the difference and why that we do not have ride-sharing businesses here in Eugene. I get kind of emotional about it, but the heartfeltness that our drivers put into door-to-door service and just providing a service to people that they wouldn't get with an Uber or ride-sharing situation, us being identified and around and able to be flagged down and help people in need. We do a lot of things, I think, that aren't given credit for, instead of just being some efficient revenue source that ultimately doesn't even want drivers in their vehicles and have autonomous vehicles, which I think says a lot about what they do. I don't want to talk badly about them, but a lot in the news about how they treat their drivers, their employees, and so on and so forth is just this efficiency, corporatization of things that I think excludes the community and the citizens of Eugene and Springfield. So I hope you consider that when you look at just the efficiency of picking up a phone and getting yourself a vehicle to get you somewhere. We provide a lot more in that as taxi drivers. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name's Emily Secord. I'm a business owner in Eugene, and I just wanted to say thank you for reopening the conversation about ride sharing. I think it's a really important topic because it allows for extra access for folks who maybe aren't able to access the other options for transportation, whether it's a time issue or a location issue or a cost issue for them. It's also really important that we provide safe and timely transportation to our residents of all demographics. I think that ride sharing gets this image of being just for young people, and I can see it being a really effective option for everyone in our community. I really am excited that this conversation is back up for discussion because I think it's important that potential business owners, people who are traveling to our community and folks who are considering moving to this area are very surprised when they arrive to Eugene and don't have an Uber or a Lyft or ride-sharing option. And so I think it's a really important thing just to stay innovative and show that we're open to business by adding this option to our community. So I strongly support permitting ride-sharing, and I think the sooner the better. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Ethan Holub, followed by Sarah Wilson.
Hello, my name is Ethan Holub. I live here in the Whitaker, and I'm a business owner. I also have helped start about 15 nonprofits here locally in the last 10 years, 5 which work directly with homeless. I'm actually here, I didn't know it was going to be talked about, but there's a lot of things I agree with. My business is a taxi business. I'm one of 50-plus business owners that have a taxi company here in Eugene that are pleading for our business. I have many friends that drive for Uber or Lyft. I have just many that drive for them, as I know, that have lost their jobs because of them. I have no problem with them being here. My plea is that you would make the playing field fair, because we have to go through so many background checks for our drivers, our insurance, all these things. Our app, for our company in particular, is no different than Uber's, minus that you can't see where our cab is, but everything else you can rate it. So if anything that's going to be changed for them, I just ask that would be changed for us. Another difference, which might just relate to my business in particularly, my wife and I, we work with foster kids, we work with homeless, and about half my drivers I've worked with 5 nonprofits, have been helped that were almost homeless, were in either from the mission or were in situations where they were about to lose their family's housing, and we've worked through those nonprofits to find them jobs, and we have hundreds of people that are now moved on to bigger careers that were in a trailer, that were living with their family, with another family. So it's been an opportunity for me not just to support and build these nonprofits, but also to take people and give them an opportunity to work and to make more money than they work with ride sharing, and also to keep the money local. Once again, I have no problem with the ride sharing. I just ask that, in terms of the insurance, in terms of the background checks, that you wouldn't, in a sense, make it so the rest of us lose our businesses when you make the changes. Just make it a fair playing field. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, Sarah Wilson, followed by Sharon Trulio. Thank you.
My name is Sarah Wilson, and I live on Countryside Lane in Ward 7. Thank you for taking time to discuss bringing ride sharing to Eugene, and I support you in making the changes necessary to bring these services to our community. As a young professional who has recently decided to make Eugene my home, I pay close attention to the things that make this place so wonderful to live. And as I get more involved, I think about the changes that could make it an even better place to live. While recognizing bringing Uber, Lyft, and other ride-sharing services to our community isn't the only or most pressing issue facing you as city councilors, it is one that could be rather easily addressed with a few updates to our current city rules. Reliable and responsible ride-sharing options would add value to our community. Sure, it's convenient, and it has the potential to add jobs to our community, but most importantly, it addresses the larger concern, safety. Whether it's the 23,000 college students who call Eugene home, professionals at happy hour, families arriving late to the airport, or Duck fans trying to go home after a long day of tailgating. A community our size needs transportation options that are available at all times, without an hour-and-a-half wait for a ride home. This issue is not new, and our current transportation providers have had time to address the shortcomings of their current services, and I personally don't think the improvements are good enough. With the holidays around the corner, I encourage you to take the steps necessary to bring ride-sharing to Eugene before New Year's Eve. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon Trulio, followed by Joe Tyndall.
Hello, I live off of Virgil Avenue. I don't know the zone. I'm actually new to Eugene. I've only been here for a year, and I happen to be a direct result of Uber and Lyft. I'm from Southern California. I drove town car professionally for 8 years. Within 8 months, I was living very high, and in 8 months, I was down here. I was forced to leave so I could take care of my animals, pay my bills, and pay rent. I'm driving now. I don't know what the big difficulty is to get a car. The taxis run 24 hours. There's 15 cab companies here. I've never had anybody wait an hour and a half. The playing field is so uneven because Uber and Lyft cheapen the cost. It gets down so low that it only benefits the people who need the ride, not the drivers. In California, I had to have fingerprinted, I was drug tested, I was everything. Uber does not do that. I am right now in 2 class action suits, and I'm not even in California, but because we drove under their umbrellas, DoorDash, Uber, Lyft, and CJ and Go, the drivers are now suing these companies. So what all of this praise is, it is not true. I have left my phone number on that piece of paper. If anybody wants to call me at any given time, go ahead, because there's so many bad stories. There are females that have been raped by Uber drivers. The gentleman who just mowed down and killed those people in New York, Uber driver. I can go on. I can tell you horrible story after horrible story. It's not good.
From the perspective of somebody that uses a wheelchair, specifically an electric wheelchair. I'm not sure what the Oregon taxi representative was talking about. I see that he left. But he indicated that he transported people that use wheelchairs. I'm thinking maybe he was referring to a manual wheelchair. There is no taxi service other than Budget Taxi in Eugene that will that can take an electric wheelchair that has a lift set up for an electric wheelchair, and the flag drop fee to pick up an electric wheelchair is $25. So when I drive with hand controls, and when my van broke, and it was at my parents' house, and I had to go 1.3 miles to my house. It cost over $25. Oregon taxi regular fee for a non-disabled wheelchair user person not with an electric wheelchair would have been $7.25. When I've been in other major cities, I rely on accessible Ubers, and in big cities it works very well. And so I think that the other thing about the Budget Taxi, when it did show up, it was a gigantic white super van, and it looked sort of like and the lift mechanism was kind of like a freight lifting system. So I had the feeling that I was freight being lifted onto this enormous vehicle, and it was embarrassing. I was hoping none of my neighbors would see me. And so I think that I know Uber has accessibility policies that would help the wheelchair users and other disabled communities in Eugene. And I would just say that as the council looks at the issue, that there should be specific requirements to make sure there are a certain number of wheelchair accessible ride sharing vehicles here. That actually it's the current private taxi services are not complying with the law, but that's and they're not serving my needs at all and others that are in my circumstances.
Thank you. And that is the end of our public testimony. I have one counselor in the queue to make comments. Any other counselors wishing to make comments?
One to pick them up in one place and take them to another. That is a fee for service. I am not a fan of this type of contingent work for folks. I believe it is a form of exploitation at its core by the companies that care little for the people who are carrying out the work. I would think that safety for people who are intoxicated would include having solid background checks for the drivers and vehicle inspections for the vehicles they're going to be in. So I understand that, especially for people who live on their phones, think that this is something that should be available everywhere in the whole United States, and that we are somehow out of touch here by not having it. But I think what gets lost in this discussion is that particularly Uber has decided it does not want to comply with local ordinances, and instead has bullied and intimidated jurisdictions into changing their local standards and bend to their much looser standards because they decided that's what they needed for their business model. So in addition, they have been caught blatantly misleading Portland authorities with a special list they put them on when they tried to call their Ubers, and operated here in Eugene out of compliance with our code for many months, and I could go on. So I'm not especially eager to invite this untrustworthy company to open up business here in our community because, frankly, I don't trust them to act in good faith. I can't think of another instance where people in this community lobbied us to allow an out-of-state company to come here and make money off our community to send it back to their out-of-state headquarters, especially one with a reputation such as Uber's. That being said, I will consider what staff has to present to us tonight in terms of possible code amendments to allow quote-unquote ride-sharing in our community. But only if we can do this in a way that will not lower our standards for safety in our community. And that's the position I'm taking. Thank you.
Uber's fines got up to, when they were here the first time, was 160 grand. We're going to cover that in our work session. Well, I was going to hope to make a different point here, which was that when they first came in, we have rules in place for the businesses who get paid to drive people from here to there. And we make everybody abide by the same rules because that's fair. And to say, well, you guys should make different rules for these guys wasn't fair to the people that, frankly, I think we've been over-regulating for a really long time, frankly, my opinion. But I understand the appeal and the importance to a lot of people, a lot of businesses, and a lot of folks that we adapt and alter our practices. However, there's a couple of pieces I'm not willing to say, like other cities have, we'll just change our laws to make it okay or let them break them. Safety's one of them. Yeah, we make drivers go through the city's police department's background check. They say let the company do it. I think people at least need to be fingerprinted, and as someone who has gone through that recently for a professional license, it's really simple. It takes about 3 minutes. You put your hand on a little screen down at the UPS and you're fingerprinted. So I think that's a pretty easy standard we can get to that we can apply. But I'm sure we'll talk about this more as we have the work session on it. But I think it's important to note that in this discussion about whether or not Uber should comply with the safety rules we have, or whether or not we should change our rules to suit them, because that's the discussion, that the #1 market in the United States for Uber is New York City, in which Uber decided to change their operating and comply entirely with New York City's pre-existing cab rules. So they have done it in the country. It's just that we're not quite that big. Thank you.
Thank you. And unless there are any other comments from councilors, I believe we are finished with the public forum. Thank you all very much.
So we could have a living dialogue. But it was more of an update, something that was too long to go in your briefings, but not necessarily ready for a work session yet. And that's kind of what we wanted to gauge was your interest. So what we wanted to do is just give you a quick update on what's been happening around the transportation network companies, in particular Uber and Lyft, and just kind of retouch in on where you want us to potentially to go with this. So the last that the council discussed this matter as a group was a couple of years ago, and that was in relation to Uber showing up and starting business without the right permits and licenses. And as you might recall, during that time, council decided to update the code to specifically allow for this type of business to operate in Eugene, and gave us some kind of clear direction on how you wanted us to address the rules to create an even playing field. And as I went back through my notes, that term even playing field was pretty pretty well, it was an 8-0 vote at the time. So we did that. We took the code amendments, we did the administrative rules, we held several focus groups, and what we ended up with was a set of rules that were kind of lowered some of the regulations on taxis and created a higher set of regulations than I think what Uber had said even at the time that they wanted. And we've been progressing in that manner. So in that, we've had 2 years of time. And in that 2 years, we haven't had any interest from Uber or Lyft to enter our market, partly because mostly because our rules just don't apply. And as Councilor Clark mentioned, they were assessed a civil penalty for operating without a license after we told them to stop, and they continued to do it. Our civil penalties allow, I can't remember the details off the top of my head, but it's like a $2,000 fine for the first, and then you can assess, I think it's up to $2,000 a day. So they had accrued about $150,000 worth of civil penalties that we settled with them. And the settlement said they would pay $92,000, and then if they came back and operated again, even one day without a license, they would have to pay the remaining $58,000. And so they haven't re-entered the market. And Matt Sayer actually did a pretty good job of summarizing what I think the three big things are. And it's not that there aren't other issues, but the three big issues that keep them from coming here are our insurance requirements. So we have a one-tier insurance. It's basically if you're in your car and your app on, which means you've said you're available to take a ride, we just consider you to be working. Their preferred model, and what every other city that has them in Oregon and probably across the country has adopted, is a 3-tier model, which means when they turn on the app, they have a much lower threshold for what they cover. It's like a $50,000 versus $2 million or $1 million. So it's $50,000 during that time, and once they've accepted the ride, it goes up. So we don't need to go into all of that detail right now, except that there's a difference. So we said one tier, and at the time we did this, nobody in Oregon, no one was licensing them to operate at that time. So a lot has changed. One of the things that's changed is that during that time, Uber was not the primary insurance on the first tier. It was the person's private insurance covered that first tier, and then they covered the second 2 tiers. We had a significant concern with that. Since that time, it's still a lower number, but Uber is actually the primary insurance on that first tier now, which is a little bit different than the last time we talked. So that's a big one for them. They won't come back into this market under a one-tier, one system. They just won't do it. The second one was the background checks. I think their number one concern with background checks being done by our police department is it's partly its speed, and the second piece is consistency. They just like to have a consistent model. And I'm using Uber as an example. There's other companies that are out there, but they tend to follow. They tend to follow Uber, and so it's just easier for me to just talk about that, and we've had the most conversations with them. So they use a company called Checker, which does a little bit of a different background check, but what we've heard from them is that both the Bend and I believe the Salem police chiefs kind of met with them, went through it, and were okay with what they did. So that's something we haven't gone down that road because we haven't had a conversation with you. And then the last thing is the vehicle inspections, which I don't think is as big of an issue. I think the insurance piece is the biggest one, but the vehicle inspections, we do those inspections, or we send somebody to a shop to do that, and we just make sure it's done. And Uber, most transportation network companies want to do that with their own way. So in like Portland, they contract with 3 Jiffy Lubes that do those 17-point service checks. In Bend, they have a mechanic that the city has approved that they send people to. And I think Medford and Salem have said we don't even care if the vehicles are safety checks, so it's not even in their rules. So those are kind of the 3 big ones. And we think that the way that this works right now is the code authorizes, in Catherine will know this better than me, but the code basically says, yep, there's this public passenger vehicle companies and drivers, and it kind of just is the authorizing code language that points to a set of administrative rules that covers most of what I just talked about. The insurance requirements, the background checks, all of that would be something that's in the admin rules, which we could just update without any council action. But the council's been so consistent in this. We just wanted to find out, it's like, how interested are you in us exploring this, seeing if there's a model that would work for Eugene, because it will take some time to do that. And then there's a possibility, based on how the background checks happen, there's a possibility we may actually need to do a code amendment, because part of the issue is around, are we tracking, are we not tracking the drivers? Do we have their information and their numbers? And if there's just something that we might have to do a small code amendment depending on how negotiations went with one of these companies. So that's, let me just double check. I guess I would say we have talked, so the leadership at Uber has shifted since we had this conversation, and it had started to shift. In fact, almost right after the council took the vote, they had kind of overhauled the people working in Oregon and shifted their approach to being much more collaborative with municipalities. So that relationship's been pretty positive. We've had some very open conversations. We know what their number one interest is consistency. And in big cities, this is important because they're sometimes going, like, for example, I took a Lyft ride when I was in San Antonio, and this Lyft driver in San Antonio was getting ready to head to Houston, as were all of them, to pick up riders for the World Series. And so they can operate under the same requirements from city to city to city, and it just makes it easy for them for the drivers to operate, and it makes it easy for Uber to operate. Doesn't mean that we like it. I'm just telling you that's what they want. And then the last piece I need to mention is we also regulate for Springfield. And so if you're a taxi operator in Eugene and Springfield, we're administering the background checks, we're doing all the vehicle checks. Springfield's made it very clear that this is something that they want us to look at and that they would like to have in their community. And so I feel like I need to at least let you know that as we enter this conversation. So really, you don't have to take real direction tonight. We just kind of wanted to get a sense of, is this something you want more information, a follow-up work session, or do you want us to just kind of let things just keep going the way they are?
Okay, thank you. I have Councilor Clark, Councilor Zelenka, Councilor Syrett, and Councilor Evans in the queue. Okay, wait a second.
Let's go down the line.
I can't write that fast.
Take us.
Okay.
Everybody.
Yeah, just go down the line.
Claire,
It's not like we have
we'll just go down the line. We're just going to go down the line.
All right.
Okay.
So thank you, Mayor. Thank you for that. I will say first that this issue is not small anymore. It's been raised to a community profile such that it's not an administrative thing anymore. It needs to go through a council vote. That's my opinion, okay? And head nods isn't going to do it. We've got into some trouble with that in the past and how our process works. So I recommend that either we're informing council or we take a vote with a specific motion, because I really think we don't want to get sideways with our process as we have in the past. Number two, level playing field is certainly important to me. Whatever rules or adjustments we might make to either administrative or to code should apply both to taxis and to ride sharing in the same fashion. I'm fine with the 3-tier insurance. That's fine, as long as that applies to taxis too. I'm incredibly concerned about background checks. 92 women were sexually assaulted by Uber drivers this summer in the United States. I think that the level of background check is a piece that we need to make sure we're right about. I don't necessarily need Uber drivers to comply with our rules because they're so special that they do it through our police department, but we need to have a minimum standard. We need fingerprints, for one. I am someone who, in my professional life, had to be fingerprinted for my license recently. It took all of 3 minutes. I went down to the UPS store and put my hand on the little screen, and they sent it electronically in. It's not complicated, and technology is our friend in this particular way. It's not difficult. So having fingerprinting as a part of that is important to me. And is my support for this. That's the piece that's most important to me, is public safety. On the car piece, I'm fine with where you will take that. But I recognize that we need to move forward as technology and innovates, and the culture innovates with how we want to deal with this. I'm great with that. But please do me the favor, find out and come back to us and tell us what it is that Uber was willing to live with in New York, because they complied with their rules without breaking them. And I would be very interested to know what it was they said they could do there. Thank you.
If it's okay with you, Council, we're just going to work our way all the way across. So, Councilor Syrett?
Sure, thank you. Well, I am glad to hear Uber staff in Oregon is better to deal with now than they were, which, you know, isn't such a big lift since they were pretty much jerks when they were here before. I couldn't come up with a more politically correct word there, sorry. You know, I really appreciate the grid showing what other jurisdictions have done. I am not interested in lowering our standards, particularly around safety, in order to make these companies happy. We wouldn't agree to do that for a manufacturing company that came to town or any other type of business that tried to insist it was special and therefore warrants special accommodations. So I would expect that any regulations we create to support the TNCs, as they are referred to here, what does that stand for again? Transport network companies, would apply to our current licensed taxis as well. And so for me, the background check is the bottom line, because we would then be saying all of our taxi companies don't need to follow the background check we've had them do since, I'm assuming, since we implemented our licensing regime here in Eugene. And as far as I know, it has worked to keep our community members safe when they are picked up by someone on the curbside at 2 a.m. because they don't want to drive drunk. And so I'm also okay with the insurance, the different tiered insurance. I would want more information about the vehicle inspection piece, but for me, the criminal background check is a non-starter in terms of us changing that standard. And then just on a couple of other items, you know, I do think we need, as a city, to find a much easier way for folks to file complaints about our current licensed taxis. I know some people who are very savvy and asked me, how do I do that? And I said, well, you should be able to find it on the city's website, and they could not, for the life of them, find a place to file a complaint. And I know that the cab companies have notices up in the cabs, but you can't always read those when, you know, it might be dark. And then the second thing is, I was very concerned about the last public comment we had tonight and about the pretty significant upcharge that folks who use wheelchairs are facing, and also the limited supply of vehicles to transport them when needed. But I don't know if there's something we could look at in our regulations around, because that's an ADA issue, and you know, there needs to be parity, and folks shouldn't be treated differently because they have to use a wheelchair.
Yeah, we noted that in the comments too, so we'll look into it.
Okay, Councilor Ye.
Thank you. I really, this chart was very helpful to get the conversation started in my head, and I do talk to myself, so yeah, it was a conversation in my head. But
you getting answers?
So you asked us what we would like. Yeah, I do. You asked us what we wanted you to bring back next time. So what I would appreciate is if we're able to do a check on the background check. You mentioned some police chiefs have looked at it, but we haven't. So if we could, I don't know if there's time if we could look into that and get a report back about, you know, how we feel about what they're doing. And also, if we were to adopt some of these changes, and we were looking at doing it for taxi companies as well, like what that would look like, I guess, like how could we level the playing field and how realistic that would be very helpful to me. I appreciate some of the comments about the fingerprinting, and I did not realize how easy it was. So I'm glad someone had some firsthand experience. Not pun unintended, firsthand experience on that. And but the rest of this stuff, I feel like is very doable. I think we can get there. So thank you.
Okay, Councilor Zelenka.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to have a breakfast meeting with some folks from the tech community, Matt and a couple other folks, and to talk about this issue. And I understand their concerns. I do still get quite a few complaints about the taxi company wait times in Eugene. And not an unsubstantial number. I guess 2 years ago when we were doing this, we were out in front of most people, in front of almost everybody, and we asked the rideshare companies to do 3 simple safety things. One was to provide adequate insurance so no uninsured drivers or motorists were on the road, and 2 was criminal background checks by our police department so we knew our citizens were going to be safe, and 3, that the vehicles were inspected so we knew that they were safe out on the road. Pretty simple stuff, but we got a lot of pushback. I've used rideshare in other cities, and I like the speed, the convenience, the price, and paying by credit card and having all that done beforehand and knowing who the driver is and seeing it, all that. I like the app and all that kind of stuff, so I've used it. I don't like their business model. I don't like their labor model, and I don't like their labor practices for at least for Uber. Having said all that, on the insurance issue, we were told that some of the insurance companies would not insure drivers when they were in that limbo on the app but don't have a rider, so that we had uninsured motorists. But since then, the market's evolved, new products are become available, the rules have are evolved in other jurisdictions. The insurance requirement isn't at the same level as what we originally required, but it's at the level of the state minimum requirement. And so I can live with that, especially if it's applied to taxis as well. So on the criminal background checks, it was a standoff. No, we would do it between us and Uber, and so they wouldn't budge. But since they now do third-party checks, and it's not our police department, but I'd be interested in finding out more about the third-party checks, see if it's acceptable. I don't understand their issue with ours. Ours apparently can be done incredibly quickly, like usually within a day. So I'm not sure about the nonsense about it takes too long and it's inconsistent, blah, 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 because I don't agree with that's true at all. I think that's a smoke screen. And then, although I do appreciate the zero tolerance policy that a lot of the TNCs have, on vehicle expansions, I think that's very solvable with third-party certifications. The one thing I do have a concern about, which I'd like to get some more information brought back up, maybe some solutions, is the ADA and accessibility about how this happens. I've heard numerous comments like the person who testified today about this doesn't work for people in wheelchairs very well. So if we could bring all that information back and hear this again, I think we can move this forward if we're satisfied.
Okay, Councilor Semple.
Thank you. I'm interested in getting more information. I have some real concerns. One is about the lack of rides, that it takes so long and people are driving drunk more often. So we need that, but I'm also wanting to be very protective of our established taxi drivers, and they have some legitimate concerns. And I agree that if we make any changes, they need to be equitable for both types of businesses. But rumors go around that Uber and Lyft are making money by not having to pay for all this insurance and vehicle inspections and background checks, and that eventually they'll drive out the cabs and then they'll raise the prices and we won't be any better off. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a concern because I want to protect people who are already employed here to a safety standard that we agree on. And who knows what Uber and Lyft will do, but I want to exercise some caution, both to give our residents more options for transportation. I think it's great if less people own cars, and this would help. But I'm not willing to risk the safety, and 92 sexual molestations is 92 too many. So I'd like more information.
Okay. Councilor Evans.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a question for you. If I remember correctly, when we took that 8-0 vote, shortly after that, Uber was very excited to have conversations with all of the councilors as well as with staff about how we could move forward. And that kind of evaporated when they presented a bill in the legislature, last legislative session, that would have preempted local authority, which basically they took a left turn in terms of their strategy with dealing with this issue. In other words, jumping over us, getting a state law in place that would eliminate, any kind of authority that we would have had to regulate them locally. To your knowledge, is that still, that bill failed, but is that still a strategy that you are aware of that's in play?
I haven't been told that, but that's something we can look into and bring back as part of the rest of this information. I haven't gotten that sense from them. I think the strategy, if you look at how it's playing out, is they're just taking cities at a time. So it's Portland and Salem, Corvallis, Bend. Medford will start on December 1st. So it's just, and when I say Bend, it's, if you actually open the app, it's Central Oregon. It goes from the top of the Cascades to far beyond Bend. They have big areas. Same with Corvallis. It's kind of mid-Willamette or upper Willamette Valley.
Yeah, my biggest concern, and I've used Uber in other cities, just like Councilors of Lincoln, other people here have done it the same way, is the business practices and the way that they have taken tax to go around us and not tried to negotiate in a straight up manner with the city. I kind of feel that that may still be their intent. However, I don't want to subscribe to something that accused them of trying to manipulate the system. But I think it's really important for us to come to, if we are going to allow them to operate in Eugene, Springfield, that we come to some kind of resolution in which they can adequately meet our community standards. I think that is important. And local preemption is not exactly something that I'm in favor of, because if we start doing that, then we might as well throw all of our municipal regulations out the window. Then there's nothing that we will have to regulate. And there won't be community standards of practice that we will, have companies or individuals to adhere to. Everything will be, it'll be pointless for us to sit up here on this dais. Really. So, I think that I'm willing to entertain this conversation, but I'm willing to entertain it in a fair and balanced format.
Okay, Councilor Pryor.
Thank you. My interests have always been and continue to be in passenger and driver safety and even playing field. I mean, those are my interests. And whatever we need to do to be able to provide for this service and still meet passenger driver safety and even playing field is fine with me. And it sounds like, interestingly, we're surprisingly close. Sounds like we're actually pretty close. There's a few issues that still need to be worked out, but we're getting closer. And I agree, they were jerks 2 years ago. And I don't know the degree to which all the jerks have been purged, or quite a few of them have, or whether we're still dealing with jerks. It's important to me to not let the emotion cloud the outcome. And so I have to work to go,
I don't want this to be an emotional choice for me. I want to really stick with passenger safety and even playing field. And I have to deal with a lot of unpleasant people in the course of doing this work. That's part of what the work is. And you have to be able to move beyond that to what you want to accomplish. And I have to keep reminding myself to do it. It sounds like with regard to the insurance, the playing field has changed. And it sounds like we're really close to being able to find something that doesn't compromise on our side, but does fit with their model more. So that one is actually less of a concern for me. It sounds like we're real close there. With regard to inspections, same thing. I want to ensure when a passenger gets into the car, the seat belts work and that the car's not going to explode. And if a third party needs to do that, or if somebody else needs to do it, sounds like there's a system in place to assure us that the car operates safely and that there's working seat belts. So it doesn't have to be me that does it, but somebody reasonable has to do it. Which gets to the third point. Does it have to be a police background inspection, or can it be an adequate background inspection? Check. And for me, to ensure passenger safety, it has to be an adequate background check. And so like others here, I want to hear back information on the adequacy of the background check system that's currently in place. How well is it working? I mean, if I'm hearing about a lot of assaults going on, does that mean the background check system is working or not working, or what could be done to make it work better? As we often know in state law, we could create a higher standard, which means anybody who met the higher standard in Eugene would be golden anywhere else. So it wouldn't actually create a problem anywhere else. I don't know if the fingerprinting system works that well or not. When I had to do the electronic, it didn't work quite that fast. It was a little bit more challenging. But nevertheless, I'd like the information back, and it seems like the key one for me will be adequate background checks. I think the insurance and the inspection piece we're pretty darn close to. And the last point, if you'll indulge me a couple of seconds, I heard a couple of people speak tonight about being in place for New Year's Eve. I don't know if that's possible or not, but back to the notion of safety, if there's a lot of drunk people out on New Year's Eve who can't get a cab, I don't know if we could meet that kind of a timeline or not, but it just stuck in my head. Yeah, New Year's Eve might be a nice time to be able to provide rides to people, whether it was Uber or somebody else who could do it.
Without fireworks.
Without fireworks.
Even if it's just an admin rule, we'd have to post it for 30 days, for sure, for comment.
It would be tight if it's just an admin rule, and we were going to need to evaluate whether it will need to be a small code amendment. If it needs to be a code amendment, January 1 is just not going to be possible. And I think the admin rule is close to not possible, but we can get you that information.
We can put cakes on.
December 11th, last meeting.
All right. Councilor Surratt, you have another
I just want to point out maybe the obvious. We might go through all this work, do our best, decide we're not going to bend to their particular desires, but do our best to create a playing field that they can come here and operate. And they may choose not to come here and operate, and that would not be on us. So I think that needs to be clear, that at some point people should be lobbying Uber and Lyft to come here rather than lobbying us to allow them to do that.
Okay, so I guess what I'm hearing, we need another work session on this.
Wait, there's more.
That's right, Dawn.
That's right. So I think we're done for now. Thank you all very much for your endurance. And